AP 120, Chapter 19, Topics, Female Reproductive Cycle. So, hormones obviously control the development of the female secondary characteristics as well as the female's reproductive cycle. Hormones are secreted by the hypothalamus that then go and affect the anterior pituitary gland, which then goes on to affect the ovaries, which then control female reproduction and development of secondary characteristics. So again, gonadotropin-releasing hormone leaves the hypothalamus, goes to the anterior pituitary gland, causing it to release luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. This all occurring at the beginning of puberty. The follicle-stimulating hormone will go through the bloodstream, reach the ovaries, and cause the ovaries to produce estrogens. And estrogens will trigger the female's secondary sexual characteristics, things like breast development, increased adipose tissue deposition, and increased vascularization of the skin. Androgens, other sex hormones, similar to testosterone, also play a role during puberty in the growth of pubic and axillary hair, and these are secreted by the adrenal cortex. It's also thought that low levels of these are what cause the broadening of the woman's hips. All right, so again, we have the follicle-stimulating hormone reaching the ovaries, leading to the stimulation and development of a primordial follicle into a primary follicle, and also the production of estrogen. The luteinizing hormone goes to the bloodstream and also reaches the ovaries. It stimulates meiosis of the oocyte, ovulation, and maintenance of the corpus luteum. Now, estrogen then leaves the ovaries, travels throughout the bloodstream, goes to the various tissues of the body, leading to development of breasts, vascularization of skin, enlargement of reproductive organs, thickening of the endometrium of the uterus, the inner lining of the uterus, and increased deposition of adipose tissue in the breast, thighs, and buttocks. And also the presence of estrogen at certain levels will then inhibit the release of more hormones by the anterior pituitary gland. All right, reproductive cycle in females must be properly coordinated. Coordinating the development of the oocyte in the ovary, referred to as the ovarian cycle, and development of the inner lining of the uterus, the uterine cycle. Basically, we need the uterus to be ready for implanting a fertilized oocyte when that oocyte is actually potentially present. So the release and arrival of the oocyte in the uterus needs to be coordinated with what's going on in the uterus. So we already talked about the development of the follicles. Follicle-stimulating hormone causes the primordial follicle to develop into a mature follicle. And then a high level of luteinizing hormone causes the mature follicle to ovulate, releasing the oocyte surrounded by the corona radiata. And then the luteinizing hormone's continued presence will cause the development and maintenance of corpus luteum, a structure within the ovary, which is the remnants of the mature follicle, but eventually that will degenerate down into the corpus albicans, which is basically a little bit of scar tissue. So, the follicle-stimulating hormone released by the anterior pituitary gland coordinates the development of follicles. When the follicles develop into the secondary follicle, they begin to produce estrogens. And so the secondary and mature follicles are producing estrogens. Then the high levels of luteinizing hormone cause ovulation and the development of corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum will produce estrogens and progesterone. But eventually, corpus luteum will break down into corpus albicans, and then the levels of estrogen and progesterone will dramatically drop, leading to the next cycle of the ovarian cycle. So again, follicular developing stage. This is triggered by the follicle-stimulating hormone. And then during this stage, estrogen is going to be produced. then ovulation when there's a spike in the amounts of luteinizing hormone, and then the luteal phase where the remnants of the mature follicle become the corpus luteum, releasing estrogen and progesterone. And then eventually this will degenerate and we'll have a drop in estrogen and progesterone levels. And then the next follicular stage will start. So follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, leading to the next follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, etc. And this on average takes around 28 days. Then we have the uterine cycle, also known as the menstrual cycle, where it starts off with when the menarche, the inner lining of the uterus, is shed and released. And that's often referred to as the menstrual flow. So the menstrual flow is the inner lining, the endometrium of the uterus. The follicular cells surrounding the oocyte are what secrete the estrogen. So during the ovarian cycle, as the follicle develops, it'll begin to produce estrogen, and estrogen causes the endometrium to reform and thicken. So the ovary is what causes the uterus to begin to prepare for potential implantation and pregnancy. So the way this works is initially there is very low levels of estrogen, little to no estrogen in the female's bloodstream. This triggers the menstrual phase. This triggers the release of the inner lining of the uterus. Then, as the ovaries begin to produce estrogen, the estrogen will lead to the redevelopment and thickening of the endometrium. This is the proliferative phase. And then when the ovaries are releasing progesterone and estrogen, the progesterone will lead to a further thickening and developing of the inner lining of the uterus so that it is now ready for implantation of the fertilized egg cell, should that happen. So it is levels of estrogen and progesterone produced by the ovaries that control the development of the lining of the uterus. So initially, low levels of estrogen causing the menstrual phase, then estrogen by itself leading to the proliferative phase, the development of the lining of the uterus, and then finally with the production of progesterone, the full development of the lining of the uterus, causing the uterus to be ready for implantation, should that be possible. So we have hormones controlling structures, controlling hormones, producing hormones that control structures. So from the anterior pituitary gland, we have follicle stimulating hormone causing follicles to develop. At this point, there are low levels of follicle stimulating hormone, low levels of estrogen. So in the uterus, there is menstruation occurring. These follicles develop. As they develop, they begin to produce estrogen. Estrogen causes the inner lining of the uterus to begin growing again. High levels of luteinizing hormone lead to ovulation. Luteinizing hormone causes development of corpus luteum, which produces estrogen and progesterone. Now, the progesterone causes the inner lining of the uterus to fully develop. Hopefully, there is an egg cell now traveling down the uterine tubes, and if it gets fertilized, there will now be a nice, safe place for that zygote, that developing embryo, to embed and lead to pregnancy. But if that doesn't happen, corpus luteum will degenerate, levels of progesterone and estrogen will go down, causing, surprise, surprise, the start of the menstrual phase, and on and on. That is the female hormonal cycle. Complicated, but important to coordinate the arrival of an embryo to the development of the uterus so that it can allow for pregnancy to occur. All right. So, some of this regulation includes regulating the hypothalamus, because again, hypothalamus starts this all off. So when there are no or low levels of estrogen and progesterone, Then the hypothalamus produces low levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone that causes the release of the follicle-stimulating hormone. So low levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone leads to the follicle-stimulating hormone being produced. As estrogen levels increase, this causes the hypothalamus to produce high levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. High levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone leads to the production of luteinizing hormone, which, as we know, leads to the development of corpus luteum. Then corpus luteum produces progesterone, and progesterone stops the production of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. So the job of the corpus luteum is to produce progesterone to develop the inner lining of the uterus, and also to tell the hypothalamus to stop, to say, hey, hypothalamus, hold on a minute, we're going to wait and see if a pregnancy occurs. So progesterone inhibits the next cycle of the female reproductive cycle. Now, what happens if fertilization and implantation occurs? Well, the developing placenta of the embryo produces a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin. And human chorionic gonadotropin extends the life of the corpus luteum. So it goes from living for about 2 weeks to living for about 3 months, producing the progesterone, which prevents a new cycle from starting. So human chorionic gonadotropin hormone produced by the placenta extends the life of corpus luteum to prevent another cycle from starting, to prevent the shedding of the lining of the uterus. Now, when a woman takes a pregnancy test, the thing that test is testing for is this hormone, human chorionic gonadotropin, because this hormone is only produced by the placenta, which can only be present if the woman is pregnant. Female reproductive disorders. We have premenstrual syndrome, cyclical disorder, where the female may be experiencing severe physical and emotional distress, usually occurring post-ovulatory phase and ends when menstruation begins. And it's not really sure exactly what causes that. Then there's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. This has a much more severe PMS-like symptoms, so much more severe symptoms, and they don't ever resolve. So this becomes a constant state for the female, and this is thought maybe to be caused by abnormal response to the ovarian hormones. Eventually, the female's reproductive lifespan will end with the process of menopause. So menopause, the menstrual cycles will cease, follicles will no longer mature, and overall estrogen levels will decline. So that is menopause. That is it for this part of the lecture.